Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the online series of introducing Kannada scholars to non-Kannadiga audience. And a brief about Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati. Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati, as you know, is a corporation under Government of Karnataka. It is dedicated to the translation. So we are engaging in the activity of translation from multiple Indian and European languages to Kannada and Kannada to other languages as well. And there are also initiatives to translate Kannada to very local and regional tongues here within Karnataka also. In this process, over a period of more than 1.5 decades, we have been able to produce a large number of, translation works, and we have been able to create a large number of translators and provide platform to them. And we have engaged ourselves in the activity of translating material from literature, autobiographies, novels to science text, to social science text, to computer technology. All kind of material has been brought into Kannada for facilitating a rich engagement with the material available in different languages. Now, from last couple of years, we are also engaged in taking our activity in the digital platform. So a lot of online activities happen, and this is one of those online series where we are interested in introducing the material, the literature, the texts which are available in Kannada, life and works of scholars of Kannada into different audience of different language. And this series focuses introduction to non-Kannadiga audience in English language, and a series of scholars who have contributed to the growth and development of Kannada have been picked up, and this series has been happening for quite a while now. And it is indeed a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you, including the guest today who will be speaking on one of the great Kannada literary scholar, Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambara. And as all of you know, Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambara is one of the very important, significant writer. He can't be characterized as a poet or some kind of a novelist. I mean, he has worked in so many genres of literature, which are of significant, for the growth of Kannada. And his work over a period of 5 decades has spanned from literature, which is reaching to which brought in a lot of folk flavor to the mainstream literature. And then he has produced novels, poetry, plays, and he has produced a lot of literature for children, etc. Now his list of the credentials of what he has done can be understood by the number of awards and honors that he has received, and he has been recipient of one of the greatest literary honor in India, Gyanpith Award. Now his work also has sort of been translated to multiple languages, and one of the speaker who has engaged with Chandrasekhar Kambara from childhood till now, and she herself has invested a lot of amount of energy in translating his work to English. Dr. Professor Krishna K. Manvalli is with us today. She will be introducing the literary work of Professor Chandrasekhar Kambara to the audience. And I must say, at this point in time, Dr. Krishna K. Manvalli does not require much of an introduction. But for the audience, I had to tell something about her. She is basically from Bangalore, and she was immersed in the literary world because her uncle Kiram Nagaraj was one of the known literary figures in Canada, and he was not simply a literary figure. He was a man who is more than an institution, who groomed a large number of generations of Kannada thinkers and scholars with all kind of radical ideas. And she was brought up with him, and from childhood she was immersed in a range of Kannada literature. And then she, after having her education, specifically in literature, Dr. Krishna Manvalli traveled to United States, and she pursued her career in English literature. She taught there, and she has been representing her literary engagement in different forum in all various big institutions, be it Harvard or Carnegie, and range of institutions in the United States and other global forums. She has produced large number of papers in various journals, and a lot of the audience today might have been familiar with her literary reviews, which come in Hindu, Times of India, and some of this journal where she introduces literature for a popular kind of writing. She has been engaging her work with post-colonial studies, feminism, translation studies, and she herself is a very good translator. She has been a kind of a new generation link between Kannada and English, connecting Indian literature to European and European to sort of Indian languages. And she currently, I mean, earlier she used to teach in English literature in Karnataka University, and right now she has been professor at University of Mysore, the place where a lot of literary scholars, be it Anantamurthy, C.D. Narasimha, Ravichandra, a large number of big names that we can think of in English literature have been located. She has been carrying this legacy forward, and her work, specifically some of the translation, the novel Karimai of Kambara, and some of the plays of Chandrasekhar Kambara has been translated to English by her. She has been recipient of innumerable number of awards, which includes also Sahitya Academy Award and other things. And she has been sitting in the boards of reviews, reviewing manuscripts of various journals, etc. So therefore, I will not be able to complete her CV in next 5 minutes. I mean, she has a very long credentials in her list. I mean, this broader sketch of what she has been doing seem to be sufficient enough to get an idea of what kind of a person Dr. Krishna Manwali, and she is the right person to sort of introduce the works, life and works of Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambara. And with this brief introduction, I welcome all the audience, and I welcome specifically Dr. Krishna Manwali to this event. And it is indeed a great pleasure and honor to have her in our online forum. And being an English professor, she would be able to communicate some of these works of Kannada to non-Kannadiga speakers more eloquently and efficiently with this hope. So I would leave this forum to Dr. Krishna Manwadi.
Thank you so much, sir. And good evening to you all. It's, of course, a great privilege and a pleasure to be talking about Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambar, whose work I have engaged with extensively as a reader, as a critic, and also as a translator. To begin with, I'd like to start with these lines, these words of Dr. Kambar, because I think that makes a lot of sense in understanding the whole corpus of his works and what is at the center, at the heart of all his writing. I am from Kodagiri, a small village in North Karnataka. This little folk place where I was born and grew up in has molded my thinking through life. Its rich myths, the stories that my people told, the close-knit structures of life lived here, these were what gave me a nearness to place. I found a sense of rootedness and a feeling of belonging. The place later becomes the microcosmic Shivapura of my writing. And as my dear friend Dr. Rajiv Taranath points out, place is at the core of my writing. I draw upon its mythopoeic imagination, but my Shivapura is not shut off from the changes in the outside world. It knows of and is affected by the larger national as well as global forces. As such, it mirrors the whole world to me. It shapes my Weltanschauung, my entire world view. This is Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambar talking about his plays, his writing, and his vision of life. The Gnanapith Award winner, illustrious Kannada writer, and perhaps the finest myth maker of our times, Chandrasekhar Kambar is an internationally acclaimed writer. Kambar's work is steeped in the folk and myth traditions of North Karnataka, but he simultaneously responds to the contemporary national and global context of our lives. For instance, he raises the issues of history, modernity, and the global imaginary in his works. As the well known critic of the 60s and 70s and the world renowned Sarod Maestro, Dr. Rajiv Taranath aptly describes in his introduction to my translation of Kambar's work, quote, Kambar's Rorichania includes everything gods, myths, demons, dreams, tragic love, and terrible destiny, alongside tractors, co op societies, environmental concerns, or global business enterprises. End quote. This is the whole vista and range that we see in Kambar's writing. Kambar is a writer who should more aptly be called a phenomenon, therefore a man of many parts. He has worked in the multiple fields of literature, theater, folk music, film, administration, building of institutions, and what have you. His literary achievements are equally versatile. He's a writer who has touched almost all the major forms and genres poetry, novel, drama, and criticism, and even a prose epic like Chicory. He has not only directed films and plays, but acted, made music, and even choreographed. In all these fields, his accomplishments are equally spectacular. He has won awards not only for writing, but for directing music for films. He writes plays that grapple with the darkest mysteries of life. And at the same time, he can also pen a very beautiful children's play like Pushparani, for instance. And I'm translating this currently. He has headed a range of institutions starting from the National School of Drama or Sahitya Academy to even the Canada University at Hampi. He won practically every award in the book in this country, from the highest Gnanapeeth to the best music director for films. Needless to say, Kambar is the iconic writer of our age. Chandrasekhar Basavanappa Kambar was born in the family of blacksmiths in Kodagiri, Belagavi district on the 2nd January in 1937. Talking about how the Shivapura of his imagination took its form, Kambar says that long ago there was actually a place called Shivapura in his Shivapura on the banks of the river. Kambar's ancestors lived there. Because of the frequent floods, they moved to Godagiri. Kambar clarifies. However, my Shivapura is a metaphor. It also has another dimension, that of the Kudala Sangama of Basavana, the great 12th century Veerashaiva saint and reformer. All my writing is a search for the values which my fictional Shivapura signifies, the place of my ancestors, Basavana's Kudala Sangama, and the land of my dreams. End quote. Godagiri was a tiny village in the colonial times. Of course, city modernity was already seeping into the place because of Gokak, where the British had set up a textile factory, and also because of the nearest city, Belagavi. Kambar witnessed this impact of colonial power in the impressionable age of his childhood. No wonder that he is acutely conscious of the colonial history. In his author's note to my recent translation of his two plays, Rishishringa and Mahmud Dewan, Kambar writes, quote, those were the times of British rule in the 40s. Some British company had established a huge textile mill in the famous Gokak Falls nearby. As children, we were fascinated by the mill and the houses of the British officers there. My villagers were both attracted to and also kind of alarmed by the lifestyles of these white people. Besides, Kambar talks about how his village was also slowly becoming aware of the freedom movement of Gandhi, of Nehru of course, and the struggle against the outsider, the white man. Such new stirrings of the national consciousness and the desire to oust the foreigner were felt in the village. These colonial and anti colonial folk histories surface in most of Kambar's work. Kambar's father, Basavanappa Kambar, although poor, was a much respected man in the village. He inculcated the taste for theater and singing in his young son. Similarly, his mother, Channamma, a very kind and nurturing person, was a veritable storehouse of folk tales. The boy heard these stories, enchanted, and imbibed a new and a vivid sense of life from them. These stories also disseminated the deep wisdom of the generations of people who had created them and filled them with their emotional and spiritual energy. In fact, the fascination with folk stories never ended in Kambar's life. Another major inspiration from his young life is the great Savalagi Swamiji. Kambar remembers and even dedicates most of his work to the Savalagi Swamiji, who helped him study and gave him a home in the ashram. Then again, he thinks often of his early teacher, Krishnamurti Puranik, and his professor in the university later, Bhusanurmat. Both encouraged him at different levels of his education. They enabled him both financially and intellectually, and they helped him excel in his education. They also shaped his creative talent. Kambar's first collection of poems titled Mugulu came out in 1958. This was also the time when he came in contact with the famous Navya poet Gopalakrishna Adikar, who became a kind of a friend and a mentor. Interestingly, though, as Kambar has often mentioned, his literary models were not the European modernists or the Indian Navya writers. He says that his models were the iconic Navodaya writer K.V. Puttappa, the great Kuvempu, and the noted poet Madhurachanna from Gulbarga. A crucial phase in Kambar's life was coming into contact with the Manohar Granthamala in the early 60s. This literary hub of Dharwad life, also called Magrama, boasted of brilliant minds like G.B. Joshi, the writer, playwright, and the founder of Magrama, the magnificent scholar and critic Kirtinath Kuttukuti, eminent playwright and actor Girish Karnad, and one of the brilliant minds of those times, Rajiv Taranath. U.R. Anantmurthy was also a frequent visitor. Kambar cherishes those conversations and the heady intellectual atmosphere of Magrama to even this day. The lasting bond he formed with Kurtukoti and Rajiv Taranacci shaped his writing. When Kambar sang his early long poem, Hedati Nikela, then listen, I will tell you. In front of these friends, they recognized Kambar as a new voice in Kannada literature. After all, Hedati Nikela is a poem which is about a foreign demon who usurps the land. Hedati Nikela became famous and was hailed as a heartbreaking poem in Kannada. Dr. Taranath, who had recognized and even shaped the writing of Dr. Ananthamurthy, saw Dr. Kambar's very different approach to writing as a major contribution to Kannada literature. He introduced Kambar to the literary giants of English like Eliot, Yeats, and others. Another important influence on Kambar's life is that of his erstwhile college teacher, translator, critic, and somebody who was deeply into folk literature, that is, of course, A.K. Ramanujan. Ramanujan had moved to Chicago in the US, but the teacher and pupil remained in touch for a long time. Ramanujan read Kambar's poem Kelati Nikela in the US. In 1968, he invited Kambar to Chicago for a teaching stint. Kambar went there on a Fulbright scholarship. American theater in the 60s was an exciting place that was experimenting with all the novel influences from all over Europe and even from outside. At this time, Kambar interestingly wrote an article titled Folk Theatre in Karnataka for a seminar there. It was this article which later grew into a full blown PhD thesis in 1975, Folk Theatre in Karnataka, Its Origin and Growth. This was with the guidance of Professor Bruce Nurmat. Even as all these theatre experiences were crystallizing in his mind, Kambar wrote the play Narcissus and later Rishishanga. In the 1970s, Kambar began teaching at the Bangalore University and he wrote the haunting Joe Kumaraswamy, which catapulted him to fame. Kambar often speaks of the time when he wrote this play and how Girish Karnad performed the role of the evil Gowda in the play. The play was staged first at the Ravindra Kalakshetra in Bangalore. It was a great success, and much later, when Kambar received his Gnanapith, Karnad sent his congratulatory note to Kambar signed Girish Gowda. Jo Kumaraswamy was later translated by Rajiv Taranath and could thus reach a wider audience, wider readership to the non-Kannada readers and the theatre audiences, of course. By this time, Kambar was being recognized in the Delhi theatre circles. He had won the Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya Award instituted by the Bharatiya Natya Sangha. When he went to Delhi to receive the award, Jokumaraswamy was staged at the National School of Drama. Legendary theatre figure and then head of NSD, Ibrahim Al-Qazi watched the play. In those times, Al-Qazi and Habib Tanvir were iconic figures in Indian theatre. Al-Qazi is supposed to have pronounced the play the best play that had come out in the past 10 years. From this time on, Kambar has been associated with the NSD all through his life. Kambar also took up a project for the prestigious Ford Foundation. The result was Siri Sampige, published in 1991. Siri Sampige, with its mesmerizing themes of life giving sexuality, fertility, fatal love, and death, made waves in the theatre circles. It was later translated into English by Rafina Hill, a renowned poet in Spanish. The writing of Sirasampige has a story behind it. Let me tell you the story. Apparently, Ramanujan told the story of the duel, the snake and man, to both Kambar and Karna. Both ended up writing plays based on the story of a changeling husband who visits the wife every night. Karnad's famous play Nagamandala came out in 1988. Kamba wrote Sirasampige later. Same can be said of Kambar's play Pushparani, which is again based on a story, The Flowering Tree, told by Ramanujan. Karnad made a film called Chaluvi, revolving around this theme later. Karnad and Kambar had met and interacted with each other on the famous Atta, the attic of the pioneer Kannada publishing house Manohar Granthamala. There was always a deep connection between us, says Kambar about Karnad. However, while for Carnot, myth is a literary device to bring out contemporary concerns, for Kambar, it's a part of the very structures of life. He responds to the contemporary turmoil through the myth mode. Be that as it may, it's little wonder that multiple awards, accolades, and nationwide recognition came Kambar's way. His other important plays, Haraka Ekuri, Sacrificial Lamb, and Jai Siddhanayaka, the victorious leader, came out. Samba Shiva, Naikate, and Kadakudure, the wild horse, followed. His plays have been staged nationally and internationally and translated into English extensively. He became a member of the prestigious Sangeet Natak Academy too. In the early 90s, Kambar moved into another field, that of university administration. And perhaps this is a time when he also went on to write the prose epic Chikori and kind of moved to the prose mood. Kambar became the vice chancellor of the new Kannada University, established in the historically famous Hampi. And he served two terms as the VC there between 1991 and 1998. Hampi has a special place in Kambar's heart. He calls the place as a place where he found some quiet and where he was able to reflect on many things about himself, about his work, and then also about the nature of life and art itself. Kambar's term in Hampi was extremely productive. He had to find a model where education was not something that was taught but created. In addition, this education had to nurture the creative energies of students. In fact, this necessitated in a lot of experiments with translations into Kannada, and finally success came after all these arduous endeavors. In fact, the BBC even made a documentary on the Kannada University in Hampi titled A Different University. Despite the pressures of administration, he was able to write Chakori, a prose poem about a musician's quest inspired by the life of Rajiv Taranath during his stay there. Soon, Kambar became the president of the Natak Academy in Karnataka. He was a member of the National School of Drama and the Sahitya Academy in Delhi. Uh, Kambar's presence made a lot of difference in these academies. He became the chairman of NSD in 1996 and served in this position until 2000. As a chairman of NSD, Kambar did some very important work. His aim was to bring all the theatre activities going on in the country to national visibility. He sought reports and reviews of plays written and staged, and then he worked with research and researched on the innovative features of Indian theatre from different parts of India. And Later, Kambar also became a member of the American Oriental Center, which helped him travel across India and then where he met a lot of scholars, writers, and actors from the country. He even traveled to Paris later and spent a fortnight studying the theater there. He was a special invitee of the French government to participate in the Avenue Theatre Festival. Kambar often mentions the most innovative production of Hamlet he had ever seen there. It seems he saw a circus company staging Hamlet. He describes with wonder how Hamlet in the play delivered his celebrated to be or not to be soliloquy, swinging adroitly from one trapeze bar to another. This amazing performance made Kambar realize how it was only the theatre that could incorporate the elements of all genres and all performative forms into it. Um, Later, Kambar traveled in Delhi, Calcutta, Chennai, and working on plays, staging his plays. And in a predominantly modernist atmosphere, Kambar was doing folk theatre. That is something that we must remember here. He met a lot of interesting people and important people in the theatre circles, and he met a lot of literary figures like Kanaya Lal, and then he and Sachidan, and then the noted writer traveled together on many international trips. The kind of conversations and fiery arguments, collaborative efforts at building a new Indian theatre was all a part of those very, very exhilarating times. Even as he was absorbed in his work at the NST, he also became associated with the Central Sahitya Academy. Interestingly enough, he between 2004 and 2010, Kambar also did a stint as the member of the Karnataka Legislative Council. He tried to develop Kannada language in all the fields, including the technological environments at that time. However, I think rather than politics, working with media like cinema and TV seems to be more in his line. His work in the film industry also brought Kambar multiple honors. He directed and gave music. His song Kaadu Kudure Odi Banditta brought the first national award, and he made a film called Sangeeta. Many of his works have been made into films. Film decision, for instance, it also won a national award in 1974. His novel Singarava Matu Aramane was another work which was made into a film. Kambar won the nation's prestigious award, the Padma Shri, in 2001, and recently the Padma Bhushan. He is, in fact, a writer who has won awards from almost every state in this country. Kerala's Kumaranashan Award in 1982, Nandikar Award from Kolkata, Joshua Sahitya Puraskaram from Andhra Pradesh, and many more, of course. The crowning glory of his career came in 2010, the highest national award for literature, the Gnanapith. This was the time when his play Mahamai had also been translated in Hindi. The well-known playwright from Gujarat, Vijay Damle, described the play as a challenge to Eurocentric modernism. The news of Kambar's Gnanapith was received rhapsodically. Another Gnanapith awardee, Anantamurthy, describes Kambar as a poet who emerged from the people. Quote, he is a poet who sings, dances, mocks, and laughs at himself and at others, and even at the gods whom he makes a part of this human world. End quote. B.V. Karant congratulated him and called him the Rishi Shringa who brought joy to Kannada land, and critics like Shiva Prakash, Narahari Balasubramaniam, and many others see Kambar as a comparable figure to the great Latin American literary giant Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Today, at 82, Kambar is as active as ever in his literary and cultural pursuits. He assumed the presidential position of the Sahitya Academy a few years ago. With Kambar's leadership, the Academy has been working assiduously for enriching and disseminating our writings from within and even beyond the borders of this country. Following this brief overview of Kambar's life and writing, I'd like to open up the corpus of Kambar's work and dwell a little on the multiple genres that he has engaged with in his writerly career. Here, my attempt is to place Kambar's work through the crisscrossing regional, national, and international discourses to demonstrate how his folk vision, even as it is rooted in the North Karnataka rural and the folk world, is profoundly responsive to the contemporary and global context of our lives. The mythical episteme assumes primacy in his writing. At the same time, his work strongly engages the political, cultural, and literary ferment of our times. Um, I would like to talk a little bit about his novels to begin with. In fact, I bracket these novels under the category of the quote unquote Shivapura novels. Because again, the microcosmic Shivapura is at the heart of these novels. This is a place where gods and men exist together, and time flows on, gathering even the temporary disturb- disturbances and disruptions from outside. In Karimai, 1975, Singarava Mattu Aramane, Chakori, written in 1996, Shikara Surya, much later in 2006, then again Shivanadangura, and they absolutely resent the brand new novel Chand B. Sarkar, written this year. We see the dynamic notions of world time and the world space getting incorporated into the everyday rhythms of the small rural and local place. Karimai, written way back in 1975, moves through a dizzying time span, starting from the mythological origins of Karimai's birth to the colonial period. The novel not only traces the familiar narrative of a rural community being destroyed by the incursion of the colonial city modernity, but more importantly, of the disruption of a form of native modernity which has already set in the village. The old Karimai temple, with its dark mystery and the three large beehives, is the center of Shivapura's religious and communal life. The first instance of the colonizer trying to assert his power over Shivapura comes in the guise of a government order to form the new panchayat. And then the Belagavi police entered the village. Colonial laws become another way of wielding power over this small rural place. And in the end, the village falls apart. Yet, Kambar holds out some hope for Shivapura. The girl child born to Sundari, fathered by the Gauda's son, becomes the new metaphor for Karimai's coming back here. On the other hand, Chakori tells the story of the dreamer musician Chandamata. It relates the story of a universal quest. Kambar says in his introduction to the translation of Chakori that this novel was inspired by the life of his friend and famous musician Pandit Rajiv Taranachi. The storyline runs thus: Chandamuta's great ambition in life is to master the moon raga, because this raga holds the key to the cosmic mystery. And he goes on a very, very arduous search and finally meets the celestial Yakshi who teaches him this raga. When he returns to the village, he sees that there is a drought there, and then he plays his flute and brings on the rain. Overnight, he becomes a hero. And this kind of brings on a lot of jealousy in the village chieftain's son Chindamuta, who has been envious of Chandamutta all through his life. He tries to kill the Yakshi, and then this results in Chandamutta turning into stone. Chinnamutta, hounded by the people, runs away. He's believed to have committed suicide, but somehow he resurfaces in the sequel written in 2006. This is a brilliant medley of myth, history, romance, political intrigues, economic warfare, and clash of human values. Kambar juxtaposes two core place images here. Kanakapuri is an allegorical world city of gold. It represents colonialism, conquest, and violence, and a lot of bloodshed. In contrast, Shivapura stands for the values of love, sharing, and connectedness of both the human and the non human natural worlds. Surya's fascinating rise, which culminates in his becoming an emperor, is a tale of endless betrayals and bloodshed on the other hand. And finally, we see the Surya, despite all the all the kind of enemies who surround him and all the setbacks that he suffers, still high on hubris, coming back to conquer the mother's hell. But he's defeated, and the novel holds out hope for Kanakapuri, and then finally we believe that it'll incorporate the great values that Shivapura stands for. But unlike the earlier two novels, Shivanadambura thrusts us directly into the global and neo-colonial nightmares of our day. While corruption sets into Shivapura with the chime of the colonial clock, the neo-colonial invasion that follows simply destroys this place. Through the novel, the two strands of what's happening to women and what's happening to environment are fused together. The rapes of village women, the ravaging of land, the destruction of the community bonds are all linked. Farmers succumb to greed for foreign money, they lose their land to the foreign company, and it's only women who stand up against this kind of neo colonial onset. Tungava, the mother figure, who's a custodian of myths and the conscience keeper of the village, warns the people about the dangers of foreign money coming into the village. Bhagirathi, the village's daughter and the Gauda's heir, is the agent of bonding in the community when it is reeling under the political and social upheavals, and women try to build Shivapura. Shari, Madevi, these are all the other women in the novel who had in building this kind of a Shivapura. Finally, the dark old man of his dreams tells the protagonist Chambisa to go to the mother's cave. And it is here that Chambisa hears the Shiva's drum, which gives him the collective and life giving truth. On a different note, Singarava Matu Aramane, Singarava and the Palace, is at once a modernist and a folk experiment in a way. The famous Malayalam filmmaker and writer Vasudevan Nair serialized its translation in the Matrabhumi when he was its editor. This 80s novel was made into a film too. It revolves around the figure of the eponymous protagonist Singarava. Here, Kambar is critiquing the isolated, self centered, and decadent lives that the palace inhabitants live. On the periphery, on the other hand, there is a sense of bustling life. The community outside of very poor, illiterate village folk is undergoing many changes too. But the final reconciliation between the palace and the people outside happens when Singaraba's illegitimate son Ravi Chandra, who has lived in the city, donates the place to start a school. So overall, we see that the Shivapura novels of Kambar presents us with an alternate vision to counter the extinction which Shivapura is heading towards because of this colonial and neo-colonial onslaughts and the manner in which they penetrate into this small place of the third world. On the other hand, Kambar's early plays, Huliyanaradu and Rishishranga, exist in a continuum with Kambar's long poem, Helatini Kela, about which I have talked a little earlier in this talk. Both the proto poem and the plays tell us the story of a foreign demon or a tiger who kills the chieftain Gauda of Shivapura village, takes his form, and enters the village. Huliyanerudu recounts the story of the young son of the Gauda, the real Gauda, and his name's Ramaganda. But Rishi Shringa is a sort of a sequel to this. There is a terrible drought in the village, and the villagers hear the prophecy that if the Gauda's son returns to the village, it'll rain. Balagonda, the son of the usurper demon, is brought back from the city where he's been studying. Will he, like the Rishi Shringa of the ancient myths, bring rain? At the end, he is seen sitting alone, shocked by the truth he has discovered about his birth. Outside, the overjoyed crowd is celebrating the arrival of Ramagonda. Torrents of rain are washing over the village upon his arrival. Talking about this play, Kambar has often alluded to how, even in his childhood, his village was acutely conscious of the presence of the British in India. The colonial domination brought about the cultural crisis and the loss of mythologies of these indigenous communities. It is this historical sense that impels Kambar to rework the original Rishishringa myth in the trilogy. Another play which revolves around a myth figure but raises crucial political and economic questions is Jo Kumaraswamy. Jo Kumaraswamy depicts the myth of a fertility god. Kambar informs us right at the beginning that the subaltern people, like women and people belonging to the caste of fisherman, washerman, and lime maker, are those who worship the strange god Jokumaraswamy, who is symbolized of all things in the form of the native Indian vegetable, the snake gourd. And then here, the protagonist of the play, Pasanna, is a veritable image of Jokumaraswamy. He challenges the Gauda on political terms, and he also challenges him on the sexual and personal terms. Although Basanna, like the god Jokumara, is ritually killed at the end of the play, his traces remain in the form of the child in the womb of the Gauda's wife. Eventually, a social renewal is prophesied where, quote, where the blood flows, springs the sprout and the shade, end quote. The play closes on a note of hope that, quote, a good government will rule and justice be done to the oppressed. Siri Sampige, written in 1991, is another much celebrated work of Kambar. It won the Sahitya Academy Award. As the play begins, we find the Prince Shivanaga of Shivapura has come of age, but there is a prophecy that the boy will split himself into two and kill himself someday. Don't let him see his reflection in the mirror, wants the prophecy. Therefore, all the mirrors in the palace are hid. He is in love with the ideal woman of the land. Circumstances force him to marry a beautiful princess called Sirisampige. He goes away every day to watch his reflection in the lake though and neglects his wife. And what happens is something that is fascinating. The Naga, who is his other half, the doppelganger, he takes the form of Shivanaga and visits Sirisampige every night. Sirisampige becomes pregnant. Finally, Shivanaga finds out about this and he subjects his wife to a strange kind of a chastity test, and in the end, he finds out after a duel that the man who has been with his wife was his other, the serpent, and he was always a part of him. He accepts Sirisampige's child and dies in the end. A play which depicts a different face of the mother or the mother goddess who is at the heart of most of Kambar's oeuvre is Mahamai. This revolves around the triangular relationship between the mother, son, and the son's beloved. Sanjiva is a doctor. He's a central character. He is the foster son of Mother Shatavi, the goddess of death. Sanjiva is helped by his mother in his medical career, but something very, very unexpected happens. He sees the princess and then falls in love with her. Although he is warned by his mother that the princess cannot be cured, he tries to cure the illness of the princess, and this brings on the anger of his mother. Sanjeeva marries the princess, they try to run away, but finally they are again in the hands of the goddess, the mother, and then the mother goddess who signifies death. But in the last twist in the play, Sanjeeva manages to save his beloved with a trick. He tricks his mother and then gives on half of his life to his beloved. And the play ends with a huge explosion, and then the anger of the mother who disappears with a promise that she will never help the boy again. So, in essence, Mahamaya is a richly textured play which tells the primordial struggle of man against the cosmic forces that test his inner strength and desire for freedom. The cohesiveness that characterizes Kambar's move also springs from the central concerns that animate all his texts. And you can see that some of them are written in the myth mold like Jokumaraswamy. Others take on an ironic and farcical structure. The best example is Samba Shiva Prahasana. In others, he forays into the historical realistic mode. But interestingly enough, there are also plays that are written in entirely realistic form. For instance, Jayasiddhanayaka, and then there is Harakayakuri, the sacrificial lamb, which is also located in our very, very urban place and time. While both plays highlight the corruption and violence in politics, their vision varies somewhat from the kind of vision which we see in some of his other plays. For instance, Kambar not only handles with equal ease the disparate forms of myth and realism, but he even blends them in the same work, some kind of a history myth combo, which is really fascinating. Written in 2011, Shivaratri takes us way back into the history of the great Virashaiva movement. It depicts the last days of great Saint Basavanna. However, what is particularly interesting about this play is that Kambar chooses to locate this play not in the grand palaces or courtyards, but in the utterly marginal liminal spaces like the poor neighborhoods of the city of Kalyana, its dark alleys, brothels, and fear ridden public squares. While history is often a patriarchal narrative that sidelines women, Kambar writes women into history. The play ends with Basavanna leaving from Kalyana and King Bichola being assassinated, but his values will always, always live in the hearts of these subaltern people, is a kind of message that the play seems to give. Then again, in Mahmud Kawan, which I have translated, Kambar brings to us a slice of the violent 15th century Bahmani history. The play revolves around the brilliant political career and the tragic end of Mahmud Kawan. It narrates how this idealistic and humane minister of the Bahmani kingdom falls prey to the bitter political intrigues and power struggles. A profound scholar, somebody who built a world class university and who also tried to bring in religious harmony, inspired by the Sufi saint Bande Nawaz, is finally condemned to death. And at this hour of his death, God Vitala himself arrives and he brings a bag of gold, which is the payment that Gavan is supposed to have given the king. Actually, this payment is something that Gavan owes the king because he has given this money from the treasury to help the poor people of a drought-ridden village. Anyways, at the end, we see again a very, very important vision that is the hallmark of Kambar's plays, which bring in history and myth together. Even as the drunken king orders Gavan's execution, and then the political intrigues and power struggles end in the demise of this great minister Gavan, you see that the message of this great man lives on in the hearts of people. Similarly, Kambar's poetry also brings up deeply personal as well as public and political issues. A life changing glance that a young man gives a girl passing by, poems on national leaders like Gandhi, a critique of world political systems in a short poem in Mao Tse, and the highly esoteric and spiritual experience of space of a Shiva Sharana, the Bailu, and the simple joys of a householder, village rituals, celebrations, the powerful myth of the moon, or the story of an ambitious boy trying to hunt the moon. A vast range of themes and experiences surface in his poetry. Kambar began as a poet even in his early college days, and as I said earlier, his early collection was Mugulu. And interestingly, what is at the heart of most of his poetry too is the maternal matrix. The archetypal mother forges the bonds of life. She is the origin of myth. She fosters relationships, she builds villages, and she becomes the center of the folk community life and then on the other hand, the male in Kambar's work is often imagined as the self loving, self absorbed, and self divided, even self destructing being. Kambar narrates the folk story he heard from his father about a young man who fell in love with his image in water. And this is something that you see across the different genres in which he works, like, for example, the plays Sirasampige, and then again Narcissus, and also some of the poems he writes. A poem that projects the magnificent image of the mother goddess, on the other hand, is Karimai. Of course, it's also something that links with the novel he wrote in the 60s. So this is a part of Kambar's collection, Yallide Shivapura. The heroic mother rules the place. She fights with gods and forces the nature to bring good things to her people. She's broken by the new and city influences that sweep over her territory. But out of this shambles, Karimai will rise again. Some villager still lights a lamp in the temple. From some dark corner of the temple, you hear a sob and a song. And then the sky is clear again. A white rag flutters on the top of the temple. Mother is ready again. She will set off to protect the village. If the image of fierce mother love is highlighted in Karimai, another poem that stands out in the same collection is intensely personal in nature. Nannava, my mother, is the poet's tribute to his mother. A few lines from this poem. In the evening, at the day's end, when the moon washes over the deep, calm blue sky with streams of milky light, the moment her once upon a time bit starts, my mother tears her guts out to build a hanging bridge to Shiva's abode. From there, from that Kailasa, she brings the god and all his retinue to perform their piece right here at home for us. This mortal mother weaves her magical stories, sings her haunting songs, despite all the pain, poverty, and hardships that the family is going through. At the end of the poem, the poet declares that his mother's brilliance surpasses even that of Goddess Saraswati. A majority of poems about women, mother, show a strong, caring, and passionate woman for whom sexuality is a way of expressing her life, her love, and then her commitment to relationships, which often cannot be confined within the rigid social boundaries. Kadukudere, which must be read in conjunction with the play of the same name, is a fascinating example. And then again, you have another poem like Navile Navile, written in 1989, and which is a part of his famous collection, Belly Meaning. The love story here has three characters: husband, wife, and peacock. Needless to say, the peacock is a luminous metaphor of beauty, love, creativity, and arts. It's this peacock that gives life to the poet's verse, the woman's body, and the barren land waiting for rain. The peacock makes rain happen. It also makes the poem happen. And this is a story about a woman, Madevi, who is the wife of the chieftain. There is a drought in the village again, and when she has to go fetch water from the forest, it's there that she meets the beautiful peacock. And these meetings keep happening over a period of time, and finally, she tells the peacock about the drought, and it is then that the peacock dances his cosmic dance and brings rain in torrents. Finally, when Madevi returns home in a wet sari after this world changing event, she is horrified to see something that her husband has done. He has got a sari woven for her from the peacock's body. He has even had the peacock feathers and blood woven into its fabric. Madevi simply looks at it, unfurls it on the floor, and walks on it, moving away from him and into the forest forever. The refrain of the poem in the last stanza invokes the peacock as Peacock, oh peacock, beautiful peacock, let the music of words flow. Many critics have seen the Mahadevi figure as the parallel of the great 12th century Veerashaiva saint Akka Mahadevi. Akka Mahadevi, who walks out of her home and sets off on a mystical quest of God, whom she envisages as her lover. And something similar can be seen in other poems like the song which has to do with the love of Mahadevi and the Jangama, who is actually, as the myth goes, is seen as a form of Shiva himself. A Jangama who is also rumored to steal wives, apart from begging for alms from the villagers. Overall, the other facets of women, even negative ones, are brought out in Kambar's poetry, like the manner in which he shows gendered spaces of Delhi or the world city of New York in terms of cabaret dancers. Such poems are completely in contrast with the kind of the woman, mother, lover figure that he brings out in his other poems. Moving on to some of the poems where we see the negative images of a self-loving male, we can talk about a paradigmatic example here, that of the Jalaraya from Bellimini. This king of waters is actually a mammoth fish. The poem narrates the life story of the fish, which keeps growing at an alarming rate. The king of water thinks no end of himself. In fact, he does not think of his end at all. That is what results in his absurd end. The tragicomic narrative is all about how this fish sees his own tail mirrored in the water one day. He sees no face, but then he thinks that this is the tail of another fish. He fights this image and then he ends up swallowing his own tail and dying right there. You have such narcissist figures who abound in his poetry, like, for example, in Gautama's first vision, where you see the problem of the other within self, or rather the divided self, the self turning into the other. And this is a poem from Takarari Nagaru, Troublemakers, which introduces the level of complication where the other within the self becomes the self in the end. So, in the end, the narrator of the poem wonders, I called him with my name, this other. I kicked him and then searched for the mirror. And I have talked about the proto poem Helati Nikela, written in the 1960s, which became a kind of an iconic poem in the Kannada literary world. And the refrain of the poem, then listen, I'll tell you, my friend, come sit before me with an open mind, is a refrain that has been echoing in a lot of Kannada literary poetry today. Then again, we see other poems where Kambar also shows some positive images of men. Often enough, these are artists, singers, idealistic soldiers, and more often than not, daring dreamers. A poem like the Kalegar and Analavani is one example. Another heart-rending story is that of a young dreamer who plans to catch the fish of silver and drowns. The poet laments, you who left sowing dreams in water, Brother boatman, we didn't think you'd drown at all. And then there is another poem, which is a kind of an ekphrasis. This is a poem about a young man who wants to hunt the moon. And this is a picture, an image which Kambar remembers from his childhood. This is a picture on the temple wall that he has seen. The moon has risen in the kingly style on the western skies over a black hillock. You see the lake, and beyond it the forest. A patri tree stands in the forest. Hiding in a tree is a young hunter. He has aimed his arrow right at the moon. In his matted hair there is a single peacock feather. He has aimed the only arrow at the moon, but a snake lurks at the boy's foot. What should the hunter do? Should he kill the moon? Should he kill the snake, wondering about his target, or fearing the serpent at his foot? Kambar's poetry, his plays and prose all exist on a fluid continuum. They give us insights into the mind of a versatile genius who can handle all these genres with equal excellence. While in this brief space, it's not possible for me to do justice to all these myriad interests and activities that Kambar has engaged with, I'd like to gesture towards his critical writings and then from the big early essays on folk theatre to his very important work, Deshiya Chintana, Kambar has strongly argued that blind mimicking of the Western literary styles and ideologies have led to a cultural crisis in our literary world today. In sum, for Kambar, myth is the major instrument of looking at life and arranging his perceptions about the world. To echo Pandit Rajiv Taranathji's words, in this country, quote, the mythical episteme is still valid, natural, and real. To say this is to point out the core of Kambar's importance to Indian literature. End quote. Thank you again.
It was an excellent introduction. In a way, it was a very difficult job to capture somebody like Chandrasekhar Kambara in some canvas. I mean, the kind of genres that he has dealt with and the kind of themes and tropes that he has been engaging with over a period of 4 5 decades in Kannada literature. And Professor Krishna was incredibly successful in not just introducing, capture his literary work, also sort of give context to the kind of life that he was engaged in terms of theater, politics, administrator, his involvement, in literature as an education administrator, etc. Uh, Actually, is an extraordinary, difficult job, and Professor Krishna has done it very efficiently. And I thank her, and I thank all the people who have been listening to this, talk for last 1 hour or so. And we would like you to respond to us and share this idea to a large number of people. And we want the literature to sort of make it global. I mean, in the sense that we want our Kannada, the flavor of Kannada literature to reach out to different languages, different countries. And I hope you will continue to participate. And with this, I thank the team which has created this excellent possibility online. I thank Professor Krishna. I thank all the members of the Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati, and more importantly, the audience who have been listening and who keep coming back to our YouTube channel and Facebook posts to sort of keep engaging with the kind of issues that we have been trying to discuss. And with this, I would like to conclude. And I wanted to remind our audience that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, we will have another important introduction of another important literary figure in Karnataka, late Professor U.R. Anantmurthy, and Dr. Ashwini Desai will be introducing it. And hope we would all meet tomorrow. We will continue to sort of capture the life and the letters of these great people tomorrow. With that, thank you very much.